Peace, this is Brother Shahid, and I'm making this video in order to put the current migration crisis that is happening in Central America in the proper context. Currently, there's a caravan of thousands of people fleeing Central American countries of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, and walking up through Mexico to the United States southern border. The countries that they are fleeing from are extremely poor and are ravaged by extreme violence and gang warfare. So they are coming to the United States in hope for an opportunity for a better life. So in response to this, the United States government has sent 5,000 armed troops to the southern border. Now, to some, this may seem fair, as every sovereign independent nation has the right to protect their borders. However, most American citizens have no clue about the reality of the situation. And the truth is that the United States is the direct cause of the current migration crisis that is happening in Central America. The United States is at fault because of their foreign policy objectives and their constant intervention in the countries in this region. In order to prove this claim, I'm going to delineate some historical events that have caused the current migration crisis. The power a country has can be simplified into three main categories: military might, economic power, and cultural influence. At first thought, the military may seem to be the most important aspect of a nation's power. However, nothing in this world is possible without money. Without a productive economy and a sufficient amount of money, the military cannot operate. This is critical to keep in mind when thinking about wars and colonization. If one nation has complete control over the economic resources of another nation, then the nation who does not control their resources is effectively a colony to the nation who does control the economy. So when analyzing the interactions between the United States and many of the nations in Central America, it has been a one-sided exploitation. And it is this exploitation that has caused the current migration caravan in Central America. For example, in 1899, the United Fruit Company was formed. Since then, it has had many different names and now currently exists as Chiquita Brands International. The United Fruit Company was an American corporation that grew tropical fruits in Central and South American plantations, and then sold the fruit primarily in the United States and Europe. Over time, the U.S. corporation grew to control vast territories and transportation networks in Central America and the Caribbean. The United Fruit Company eventually became so large and dominant that the economies of some countries in Central America revolved around the bananas sold from the United Fruit Company, and these countries became known as banana republics. The United Fruit Company participated in the neo-colonialization of Latin America by using every trick in the book, including monoculture, vertical integration, and it eventually became a monopoly so powerful that the United Fruit Company participated directly in coups d'etats, guiding regime change to suit their monetary objectives. The banana company grew to have more economic power than the host countries themselves. Their exploitation of foreign lands led to environmental destruction, horrible work conditions for the workers, and corrupt military governments in Latin America. This corporation grew big enough to have a profound and long-lasting impact on the economic and political development of several different Latin American countries. Another example is the International Railways of Central America, which was a United States-based company that controlled key railroads in Guatemala and El Salvador. In 1912, the International Railways owned nearly all of Guatemala's railways and a major Salvadorian railway. In 1936, the United Fruit Company actually purchased parts of the International Railways. Economic abuse from the United States to Central America has also come in the form of trade deals. CAFTA-DR, the Central American Free Trade Agreement, is a trade deal between the United States, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and the Dominican Republic. This deal has had a devastating effect on Central America, contributing to poverty and dislocation. The United States initially claimed that this agreement would improve the Central American economies, but instead multinational U.S. corporations have exploited these Central American countries for maximum profit and have undermined the economies of these nations. A provision in the CAFTA-DR agreement known as ISDS, Investor State Dispute Settlement, is a mechanism which allows these foreign corporations to easily sue the Central American governments over a long list of alleged violations as a form of investor protections. As of January 1st, 2015, 100% of U.S. consumer and industrial goods that meet certain requirements enter CAFTA-DR countries duty-free with no tariffs. This makes it very difficult for smaller domestic industries to compete. Apart from economics, the United States has directly intervened in the political affairs of many Central American countries. In 1932, there was a peasant uprising in El Salvador against the dictator Maximiliano Martinez. The uprising resulted in the defeat of the rebels and the massacre of between 30 and 40,000 rebels who were mainly indigenous. This has become known as La Matanza, the slaughter. During this uprising, the U.S. sent a naval fleet to El Salvador in case Martinez needed help squashing the rebellion. This was in order to prevent the destruction of El Salvador and protect United States corporate interests, which included the United Fruit Company and others. Between 1980 and 1992, El Salvador suffered a brutal civil war in which the United States was directly and militarily involved. During the Civil War in the 1980s, Atlacatel soldiers were equipped and directed by U.S. military advisors operating in El Salvador. The New York Times described the Atlacatel Battalion as the pride of the United States military team in San Salvador. After the Civil War, the battalion was found guilty of multiple war crimes, including several massacres and many other horrible and heinous crimes. During all of this, the United States officials never gave human rights concerns precedence over their need to win the war. At least 80,000 were killed in the Civil War, with the United Nations estimating that 85% were committed by Salvadorian military and death squads. During the 1984 election in El Salvador, the United States funneled $1.4 million to her preferred political parties. In 1990, Congress passed legislation giving Salvadorians temporary protected status in the United States, only for, in 2018, President Donald Trump to end the temporary protected status for 200,000 Salvadorians living in the U.S. So if we look at the countries of Honduras and Guatemala, the United States behavior has been more of the same. In 1911 in Honduras, an American entrepreneur named Samuel Zemurray worked with a United States General, Lee Christmas, to overthrow the Honduran president and replace him with ex-president Manuel Bonilla. In exchange for this coup d'etat, the U.S. corporations were granted natural resources and tax incentives. Samuel Zemurray would eventually become the head of the United Fruit Company. By 1914, U.S. banana interests would own 1 million acres of the best land in Honduras and the transportation infrastructure. After all this, Honduras was essentially transformed into a foreign-controlled banana republic. In 1975, the United Fruit Company acknowledged of having paid a Honduran official $1.25 million to reduce banana export taxes paid by the company. In the 1980s, the Ronald Reagan administration stationed thousands of United States troops in Honduras to train the rebels against Nicaragua's Sandinistas. In 1984, United States military aid reached $77.5 million. In 2005, Honduras entered the crippling CAFTA trade agreement. Honduras went from being a net agricultural exporter to the United States 6 straight years before CAFTA to being a net agricultural importer 6 straight years after CAFTA. In 2009, the democratically elected Honduran president was Manuel Zelaya. Zelaya announced that he intended to hold a referendum on the replacement of the 1982 Constitution, which was written under the reign of the United States military-backed dictator Garcia. Zelaya was then overthrown in a coup led by the Honduran general Romeo Velázquez, who was a graduate of the United States Army training program nicknamed School of Assassins. Last year in 2017, political instability continued as thousands of people protested the legitimacy of the election. This selfish interventionist behavior is the same all over the world. The goal of the United States is to take global hegemony over the earth and to take all the resources of the planet under their military and economic control. This is evident through AFRICOM and the constant long-lasting wars perpetuated by the U.S. in the Middle East. Economic subversion of governments through debt, coup d'etats, and the negative propaganda of foreign leaders in order to justify military action are typical tactics used by the United States in order to achieve its objectives. This is their modus operandi. So looking at the people in the caravan as dangerous foreign aliens who seek to harm the United States is very hypocritical from the United States government. Instead, the United States should own up to its culpability in this situation and be responsible for the economic conditions it has created in these countries. The only way to rectify this situation would be for the United States government to end these exploitive trade agreements and to rebuild the countries, the places, and the lives that they have destroyed. Thank you for watching. Let's continue to spread the truth as this situation progresses, and let's change the world.